Can we raise the lights a bit? Because I'd like to just see whether there are questions to our panelists. One here. Yes, thanks, Justin. Any others just in this first round? Let me start with you, Justin.
Ian, a question for you. Just whether waste management themselves could have come up with Recycle Bank as the solution, and any other sort of about their 30 investments they've got.
So, am I on?
You are.
It's funny you should ask that question, because there were actually 3 reasons why we were interested in the partnership. One is they're a financial investor in Recycle Bank, but that really wasn't the primary driver. The second was what I mentioned, is we see them as a channel partner and a path to scale. And they're an aligned investor, given what we read as this sort of transformation. But to your question, there was a third reason, which is they saw Recycle Bank as this emerging, innovative entity, disruptive force in the marketplace, small but disruptive. They launched essentially a competitor to Recycle Bank, and as part of the partner, they finally realized that they have certain core competencies, and maybe ultimately it would be better to think about a collaborative relationship rather than a competitive relationship. So the third part of this partnership was we've assumed all of the assets associated with what was formerly a competitor of ours, and now we're collaborating with Waste Management. So I think that's also a very interesting part of the story, in terms of this, because we were talking earlier about, competition versus collaboration, and so that was another driver of the partnership.
And maybe a question to all 3 of you. One of the issues that's come up earlier on today is a different problem of scale. How do big incumbent institutions, organizations, companies, or whatever work effectively with smaller organizations without sort of squeezing the life out of them? And that could be as true of cities as it might be of healthcare institutions and companies, or waste management was. Does anyone want to comment on some of the lessons learned on how David can dance or learn to love Goliath, or vice versa?
Well, I'm David. We have a major issue in healthcare with Goliaths. Actually, it's a real problem. I think it's because small and medium enterprises, small companies, can take risks, can move very quickly, and can make decisions like that. Large, politically orientated organizations have layers of management, and all of them are trying to not make a mistake. And if you don't make any, you can't make a cake without breaking eggs type thing. If you don't do that, nothing happens. And I have little solutions. I think, to be honest with you, I think the new world will be that many major organizations will be broken up. I just think it has to happen. I don't think we need them anymore as well. I think that in the past, because communication was difficult, everything was more slow, big organizations could last and had kind of an entrepreneur that they just don't have now, and I don't think we need them. I think you'll see them all splitting up and being much smaller as time goes by.
I can see that in the business world, but less so in the world of cities. And one of the most interesting pieces of research in the cityscape that I think some of us have seen in recent times was Geoffrey West's work at the Santa Fe Institute about how there is a very different and positive scaling effect as cities grow. Their energy consumption and various other things go down. So, I mean, any lessons learned from different scales of community or cities in how you drive this sort of change?
Absolutely. I mean, with C40, the ambition originally was to bring together the world's largest megacities with a number of what we call affiliate cities, which are cities that are much more nimble than the large cities. So if you try and get something done in London or Mumbai or Moscow, really challenging. But Copenhagen or Rotterdam can do something a lot faster because they're more nimble. So what we've been trying to do then is transfer the knowledge that has been accumulated in the more nimble cities. So for one example, within the UK, we've been working with Salford. You don't really think of Salford as nimble, but they've done some amazing things with street lighting, and they've taught us a number of lessons that we can take to London. They've achieved an amazing price points and warranty lengths on their street lights. So we've said, okay, how can we take the information that they've generated through their procurement process and then share that with the 32 individual boroughs within London? And we're doing a lot of that through the networks as well with our cities, matching the affiliate cities with larger cities and leading some of our networks so that we can take a look at a city that has achieved something but not to scale, and figure out then how do they work with, for example, we're exploring how Stockholm could possibly work with Sao Paulo on one of our new networks around sustainable urban development. Really easy for Stockholm, really difficult for Sao Paulo. So how do you transfer from one to the other? So we're still figuring it out, but it's there's a lot that can be learned, we think.
And a question perhaps for all of you, which is about politics. I mean, you, Terry, had that map of the London boroughs with the different colorations. I don't want you to wax party political, but do you have any observations about how you best manage the political cycles, whether it's in health, whether it's in urban development, whether it's in the sort of things that Recycle Bank does? You must have learned some fairly painful lessons along the way.
I mean, with London, what's been really interesting is that with a new administration or even new staff within the administration, there's been a lot of changes with mayor's advisors recently. And a lot of it is just really making the case over and over again for a new program and sometimes renaming it. So the REFIT program that I mentioned, it was actually started by Ken Livingston, and it was then called BEEP, Building Energy Efficiency Program. And when Boris came in, was, hey, here's this great program. Let's call it REFIT. It's totally new, but actually, so you'll notice in my presentation I referred to London founded. It was a different mayor, but these things continue. So it's just learning to position something that may have been started in a previous administration in the way that the new administration wants to see it. And sometimes they have different outcomes that they want to achieve for their administration. So you just need to position it in the framework of the outcomes that they're trying to achieve.
And thank you. Ian, Politics 101. Politics in New York or Philadelphia directly transferable to London, vice versa, or?
Well, so the reason we ended up in the UK was we had sort of demonstrated the efficacy of the original model in various urban environments in the US. And when Boris Johnson was running to become the mayor of London the first time around, he found out about Recycle Bank. And as part of his original sort of election platform, he spoke about this little interesting company. And what I think intrigued him was the fact that we were using a positive incentive around behavior change rather than a more punitive approach. And so that's actually what led to us opening the business here in the UK. So the story travels, and I think in our case, we work obviously with city governments and as the client, if you will. And I don't think we're immune from the changing of the guard from a political point of view. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, a good idea is fundamentally a good idea. And I think one of the things that certainly intrigued me about Recycle Bank is inherent in it is this sort of win-win-win story. I mean, it's good for the city because we're creating economic value and environmental benefit. It's good for the citizenry in the city because we're creating economic savings for the citizenry, and it's good for the local businesses because we're driving business. So that doesn't make us immune from the political realities or the changes, but I think it helps.
And David, do's and don'ts with dealing with the political process or politicians?
Very difficult. One of the funny things is that we find that the party political label doesn't actually well characterize people's views in healthcare for two reasons. One, it is a complex subject and a lot of people have quite strong opinions. And two, it is one where constituency issues become very important to how people view things because no one wants their A&E to close down, etc., etc. So we find it quite a minefield, to be honest with you, and it's very difficult to read when health minister changes. And health ministers change pretty rapidly because it's a very tough job, for obvious reasons, to figure out exactly how the policy is going to swing until you've spent time with the person. We try, if we can, frankly, to insulate our investments from politics by making them so important that it doesn't matter how the shifting sands occur, they still have a role. Not easy.
Can I just take a couple of questions or comments, and then I need to close off this panel, so please.
Thanks.
Sushant, perhaps another one.
James Payne, Imperial College. Given that this session is about scaling solutions, we've discussed technology, we've discussed sort of bureaucracy barriers, politics. Are we missing here discussing the role that businesses, capitalist businesses can play with their, by engaging their customers? And is there a role here around people, customers, citizens as agents of scaling? And are we doing enough to tell the story of sustainability? We were talking earlier about storytelling. Are we doing a good job at telling the sustainability story, at not just engaging people as sort of economic agents with sort of rational points, but also engaging them emotionally and really sort of telling compelling stories in a way that will sort of create a groundswell of support and create the conditions for scaling solutions?
Thank you. So Sushant here, and then you, and then if I could close it off. Thank you.
Hi there, Sushant Zanganapur from the Skoll Center. Just curious if you can comment on some best practices for entrepreneurs to engage meaningfully with public sector organizations on scaling up some of the innovative, disruptive models for change, high impact models for change. How best could they go about this? Because we want to accelerate the impact and not just go through these phases of incubation to next seed funding, so on and so forth. Let's skip some steps. How could they best do this?
And one final one here. Thank you. And then can I ask just each of you to pick up one or other of the questions in closing?
This is more a comment than a question.
That's fine.
In terms of scaling up, my name's Susan Schnadhorst. I work for Renewable Energy Systems. One of the things that I've looked at in terms of trying to promote CSR within our own organization is looking at the current trend that perhaps Cloud Apps exemplifies, where you're trying to tap into the gaming technology using apps to get people to score points and then maybe get rewarded by the company with a little bonus, or have like a league table within the company for them to exhibit sustainable behaviors outside their workplace. So it's the same sort of concept as your recycle bank, but it's playing on sort of the CSR element, and it's using businesses trying to improve their image, not just within the office hours, but outside office hours as well.
Thank you.
Thoughts? John, maybe I'll jump in on at least on the first question. So one thing I didn't make explicit at all is that Recycle Bank's business, there's sort of two parts to the model. So one is we generate revenue based on the savings that the cities realize. We share those savings with the cities that we work with. But the other part of the model is the idea is that as our audience grows and scales, it's becoming increasingly of interest to major consumer-facing brands. So you can also think about what we're doing, particularly the digital sort of engagement part of what we're doing. You can think about Recycle Bank as a media model. So, for example, we're working in a partnership with Unilever. I think probably most of the people in the room know the current story of Unilever. I think where they are going is not only radical, I think it's completely heretical. And one of the things that they're explicitly talking about is consumer behavior change, because they know that they have the biggest impact. 2 billion people a day use Unilever products around the world. The two sources of impact are the product ingredients and the use of the product and what happens to the product at the end of its life cycle. So Unilever is very interested in a partnership with us because of their explicit interest in driving consumer behavior change and making these stories much more accessible, relevant, and inspirational on the consumer-facing side of things.
Okay, Terry.
Yeah, two quick comments. I mean, first on the narrative and really selling the vision. I think we see that very much as a role of mayors. And so one thing that we've been doing is the former mayor's advisor for the environment had put together a really interesting narrative about London's environmental plan, and it's about putting the village back into the city, and drew some amazing images of what London could look like if we implemented all these amazing environmental plans that we had in place. And it was amazing because he gave a presentation to our steering committee of cities, and they loved it. And they said, we need to think through this narrative for our own city. So we very much want to work with the mayor's offices on that, and so that mayors can sell it to their constituency, so that it also helps them to do more because they have buy-in. So that's just a quick response on that one. And then in terms of how can innovators, entrepreneurs work better with bureaucracy, it's challenging. And what I'd really encourage companies to do is to learn the system. And that was really my final point, that we want to work to change this system. system, and I think we all want to see that, but it's going to take time. And so I can't tell you the number of companies that approach me and say, I'm so frustrated, I'm trying to sell this streetlight or this building retrofitting solution into the city, they just won't listen to me. And I have to sit them down and explain that map that you saw of the borough structure and how decisions are made and all of that. And so I think what can be really helpful is if entrepreneurs, it's time consuming, but if they can learn what the system is and how it works and how it doesn't work and put a proposal together. If you sent an email to a deputy mayor and instead of just complaining that you couldn't sell your product, you said, here's what I think you could do, here's what can be implemented, this is how it will work, they will have a meeting with you. So that's what I would encourage everyone to do.
Brilliant. What I'd like to do, since David, hopefully you will stay.